Hello, welcome to another episode of SoFly. It is the end of March, and we're recording another episode. Very excited to be back here doing another show. Of course, we've got myself, Mitch. We've got Yilma.
Hello, everyone.
And we've got Idis.
Hello.
And Aldo can't be with us today because he has got other work things that came up, and so he's out working right now, even though it's 7 o'clock. Does he ever stop, Yilma?
No.
So he's going, isn't he?
Four letters. Y-E-E-T.
Yeet? Yeet. Yeah, okay. Well, rock and roll, Yelma. We are very excited to be finally recording a show with somebody we've been trying to get on the show for a little while now, and finally our schedule's all lined up. We're super excited to be chatting with Matt Shilling, who's the Executive Director of Indifly, a nonprofit organization committed to serving Indigenous communities, who are stewards of 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity. He's by far the worst fly angler of the group, or so he says. We're going to talk about that today. But he's passionate about conservation and sustainable livelihoods. Shilling's got experience in both the private and public sectors, having served in government as an advisor, executive, and board member of companies, nonprofit organizations. Super excited to be chatting with him today. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Honored to be here. You know, that intro is always my least favorite part of this whole thing.
Yeah, how come?
But I don't know. I take these self-assessments things when we add people to the team, and I always have the lowest score being self-promotion. So I just hate hearing about myself. I also hate hearing my voice. So
yeah. Great to be on the podcast then. Yeah, that's a perfect place for you. I hear you, man. I feel like we've talked about this too. We feel the same way. It's always weird, like hearing about the cool stuff you do, but like you do cool stuff.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Happy to be here to talk about it.
Yeah, stoked. So whereabouts are you calling in from today?
I am in lovely St. Paul, Minnesota.
Beautiful.
Where it is the end of March, and we're going to get a few inches of snow later this week. So spring is not exactly sprung here. Has not exactly sprung, but we're getting closer.
Yeah.
I think you guys may relate to this, being from Canada. But it took me a few years to acclimate to the cold. But man, the darkness is a real thing.
The darkness, yeah,
for real.
It is brutal still. So
yeah,
we're getting better every day,
man. Like honestly, these guys have heard it. I've been bitching about it for the last month. I'm just like, get me out of this weather. Like, it's dark nights and just short days. It's like really like March hits. It's like okay, enough. Let's get this going.
Well, that's nice. It's lighter, longer now.
Yeah, now it's like at least there's that. So where'd you grow up then? You said you moved to Minnesota. Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in Indiana,
nice.
Actually, and I was listening to a podcast earlier with Joe Gugino from Costa.
Yeah.
Oh, right on.
Brought up the name Hayden Dobbins, and I don't know if you guys actually know him or just know of him. But he and I grew up in neighboring towns.
Okay.
He's much younger than I am.
Yeah.
But small world there. And, I moved out, as quickly as I could, basically. So when I went to college, and then I spent most of my adult life in D.C. We moved here almost 9 years ago.
So the Midwest wasn't really a place for you.
It is. Here I am.
Yeah. Well, I guess Indiana specifically, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. I always thought I wanted to go. I grew up in a really small town. I always thought I would find myself in a town like that.
Yeah.
But wasn't quite ready. And then lived in a big city for a while and realized I could never go back to a small town.
Yeah, yeah.
Great place to visit.
Yeah.
But
I get you. Yeah, I think we kind of all feel the same. I mean, we're in Toronto, so we bond over crappy winters and, and the love to be in more bumping place,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel that. Okay, so before we maybe talk about Indifly and like all the great work that Indifly does, why don't we just jump into your starting of your life, fishing, outdoors? Like, how did that stuff kick off?
Yeah, so spent a ton of time outdoors as a kid. I have these very vivid memories of fishing a pond with my grandmother, actually, when I was really, really young, with, a cane pole. And then, really the fly fishing component started later than probably most of your guests for me in life, which was, probably like 2008. I met a group of guys in D.C. who loved to fly fish, And at that time, the urban fishing thing was becoming bigger. That's towards the front end of the carp fishery. And so, we just go out on the Potomac and spend a day. I did a lot of watching and learning. And then about a year later, I started spending a bunch of time out west, and I had a couple buddies who lived in Utah. And those two really taught me the ins and outs of trout fishing. And then, I kind of did probably the opposite of what is smart and started saltwater fishing probably a little too early and, learned all the mistakes there as well. Yeah. So, I always joke and say I'm the worst flying of the group, which I think there is some truth in. But, I go on these trips and I'm always with people who do it for a living or have done it for many more years than I have. And part of what I love about the sport is, man, you just will never be a master of everything. There's always something to learn. And so, that to me is very intriguing about the sport and also very humbling.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
It's a really good point. Like, you have people that are like dialed at one specific way of fishing, and it's like so niche, and then you take those people to say the salt, if they're like dry trout fish anglers, and they just don't know what the heck they're doing. So it's like, sure, there are like these nuances and niches to it all.
And chapters. We have, although he likes to say this is his salt years, I'm sure after that's done, he's going to do, these are my dry fly years or my bamboo years, or, he'll switch it up. But that's like what you were saying, you're always progressing, learning,
eras of the fly fishing life.
Yeah,
I dig it. Do you remember what your first fish on the fly rod was?
Oh, yeah, definitely a brown trout. Nice. At the time, I thought it was a very large brown trout. It probably was not. I don't. I'm sure there's a picture somewhere. I do remember the rush, though. And, at that point, I was, pun intended, I guess, hooked.
Yeah.
It's just, to me, the technical aspect of the sport is super appealing. Obviously different salt, freshwater, wherever you go.
Yeah.
But, the multifaceted approach to the sport, I think, is something that's appealing to obviously more and more people every day.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is blowing up. Like, fly fishing is becoming, like, you see it everywhere, like maybe it was niche at one point, but it's like certainly doesn't feel like it's niche anymore. Maybe that's just because we're all in really big part, like really deep into it, but...
Well, and I think what you're seeing is the perceived barrier to entry is changing, right?
Right.
I mean, it used to be back in the day when, it was largely thought of as an upper class sport.
Yeah.
That, you have to buy a $900 rod and a $900 reel and boots and waders and all these things.
Yeah.
And now the industry has done such a good job of making it accessible to more and more people. And so it's fun to watch it grow, man. One of the things, I'm obviously a big conservation guy. I have yet to find a fly angler who, doesn't care about the resource in which they're utilizing.
Yeah.
And so it's, when you talk about sustainable use of resources, it's hard to find a better sport.
Yeah. No, good point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Very good.
Yeah, fly fishing does attract like a really interesting kind of person to it, and it does foster like communities that do great things, and I feel like maybe Indifly is one of those. So why don't we talk a little bit about Indifly?
Good segue.
Like, what is Indifly?
You guys are good at this. Look at that segue.
That's quite the segue we got there.
Yeah, so kind of as mentioned in the intro, we're a nonprofit. We kind of bill ourselves as this community first nonprofit.
Yeah.
We give Indigenous peoples an enterprise-based framework, for the creation of livelihoods. And what we're really doing there is we, when you go into a community, and I'll talk later about why Indigenous, right, while we focus on those communities. But when you go into a community and, you tell them, hey, here's whatever it is. Here's some stuff. Here's some money. Here's some whatever. You should do conservation. That doesn't always create the long-term generational approach to sustainability that we need. And so what we help people do is create 100% community-owned and operated fly fishing ecotourism lodges. And so those lodges kind of serve as, I liken it to a hub and spoke model. So those lodges serve as the hub, if you will. That's where community members become employed through. That's where visitors go to immerse in cultures. That's where, the large economic driver of what we do is. But what's really cool about the model is it affords all these little other smaller scale entrepreneurial activities around it that are the spokes, if you will, that are really unique businesses that community members can stand up outside of that hub. Think about things like shuttle companies or, largely this is a Western and European destination in almost all of our projects, with the exception of one, I guess. My point is the diet is different, right? People generally want eggs for breakfast. Well, in a lot of these communities, there's no chickens. So somebody buys chickens and starts laying eggs and sells them back to the lodge. And, those are just a couple of examples, but there's a whole hospitality side and, all groundskeeping and all of that. So the point is, what we're trying to do here is kind of work across these three pillars of sustainability. That would be the economic one, right? How do you provide an economic incentive for these vital stewards of resources to protect their lands and waters and wildlife? We also have two other pillars that I'll just briefly talk about, which is cultural is one of them. So in a lot of the places that we work, especially here in North America, people are struggling, communities are struggling on how to retain that culture and ensure that it's passed down. And so we can help develop programs in which that culture remains because it's an important part of a business, right? You guys all travel the world. Generally what I find when people go to a cool new place, and do it often, it's not necessarily coming back and telling the stories to their family at the dinner table or their buddies at the bar of, I caught X number of fish that were this size. It's generally, I went to this really cool place, met these really cool people, and now I have a totally different perspective in my day-to-day life. Yeah. And, that immersing in a culture can be a really good business decision for the community. Obviously it's super important that culture is passed on as well. Mm-hmm. And so, we do a lot of youth engagement efforts around that. But I want to be clear. I'm a white guy from the United States, right? We're not going in and teaching culture. Yeah. We're, placing an emphasis on the importance of that culture. Yeah. Then the third pillar of sustainability, which, we always say we stand on these three pillars of sustainability, is environmental. We talked briefly about the fly fishing community being one of very little impact to a resource. Mm-hmm. The flip side of that is there is a certain amount of pressure that a fishery can withhold or withstand. Yep. And, in many of these communities that we work in, that's their subsistence source. That's what they feed their families with. And the last thing that we would want to do is invite people from the outside and apply additional pressure and, the fishery not be sustainable. And so, or not allow for that pressure, or be able to handle that pressure. So, everything we do is rooted in science, and we base all the decisions on science. And so, typically at the beginning of every project, and everyone's very different, we'll send a science team in as step one and say, all right, what is the actual current and projected capacity of this fishery? Mm-hmm.
What a unique business.
Wow.
Model. I honestly haven't heard of something like this before. But is there other besides fly fishing, does this type of thing exist for say hiking or other activity tourist based like outdoor tourist activities?
More and more so, yeah. And look, I think Indifly's organization, we use fly fishing for a few reasons. I think that I'm assuming most of your audience are fly anglers, but for those who aren't, people listening to the show may ask themselves, look, these guys clearly like fly fishing, but is it really a viable solution? And the fact is, it's a proven model, right? It's familiar. A lot of the communities that we go into fish every day. It's a different type of fishing, right? I mean, they may be bow fishing, they may be using nets, they may be using hand lines, but we just simply expand on that local knowledge of the resource and introduce a new tool which drives tourism, which provides jobs and some economic incentive to do conservation again. Look, the other side of that is when you walk into a community and say, we're going to teach you how to catch fish in the most inefficient way possible, and people are going to come down here and hopefully keep them in the water, but take a picture with them and let them go. They think you're a bit crazy. And there's a lot of entertainment derived from that, I'm sure, at our expense locally. But the point is that they are experts in the resource most often, and we just introduce a different tool. It's sustainable. We've kind of already touched on that. All these things all of our projects are catch and release. What is the really interesting shift to see there is the realization from communities that fish is now, it means something more in the water than it does out of the water, right? And
the educational really cool aspect. Sorry to interrupt.
Exactly. Yeah. There's some really There's some really cool stories about take our first project was in Guyana, Amazon basin, middle of the rainforest, a little village of almost 300 people. They have a very special fish called the arapaima. Typically what happens in that resource is they have a rainy season and a dry season. During the rainy season to dry season, the water changes 40 feet. It's very significant. So the fish live in the rivers. Jungle floods. The water recedes. The fish actually get trapped in these ponds. And then during the dry season, you can go target these fish. There was a couple years back, there was like a 3-year, 3-season cycle where they just didn't receive a lot of rain. And so what happens, it's hot down there, right? Evaporation's a thing. The jungle sucks up the water. Some of it goes in the air. But point being, these fish were becoming exposed to predation. I always liken this place to like a Disney movie. There's lots of big birds. There's lots of big cats. Generally, everything wants to kill you. Big snakes. And so, they all can now see this fish. The fear is that fish is going to become, dead. And so, without any encouragement from anyone, what these villagers did was they took these very heavy hand dug out canoes, filled them with water from the river, drug them through the jungle, put the fish in the canoe, and drug them back out and put them in the river so the fish would survive, right?
Wow.
Previously, that fish is very large and would feed a lot of people. They would likely just let the thing die and then eat it. But it's stories like that, right? So that, it's sustainable part is, it just like the whole thing instills this conservation ethic, or helps people get to this conservation ethic, which many examples of anglers going down and trying to they always talk about why they release the fish, and the importance of that fish to the greater ecosystem and all those things. But anyway, the point is it's sustainable, and that's why it works. And then, look, it can also be lucrative. You guys all travel the world and you spend some money. Done right, ecotourism operations can drastically improve a community's economic bottom line. that really is one of the things that we try to focus on too. Is what is this model that can result in the creation of a sustainable livelihoods, which allows for these communities to reinvest in themselves. At the end of the day, what these businesses do is they generate these community-wide benefits. They create incentives for the protection of the homeland. They allow for people to be employed, so they don't have to leave the village or the place and go find work. So it's just this really cool story of reinvestment as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's like so many different, just my head spinning and thinking about all the things that could come from this type of endeavor. Like you're saying, people don't have to leave, and they can invest in the land, conservation, protection, and all that stuff. Let's maybe go back. Who started this company like Indifly? Who had this idea?
So it's a really interesting story. Backing up all the way to the beginning, Costa Sunglasses. They had a pro that they worked with at the time that was in this little village. It's called Rewa, in the middle of the Amazon basin on a birding trip. And so they were just using Rewa as kind of like an overnight stop. And he, as he does, talked to the people and, figured out that they had arapaima, this really special fish there, which, hadn't been caught on the fly. That's a whole nother thing. But he came back to Costa and was telling Costa about it, and Costa was like, man, we should really figure out a way to help them. So the flip side of that is, the first time I went to Rewa, which was one of the very first trips, the first trip, I expected loincloths and spears, and what I got was Ed Hardy T-shirts. Almost all of these communities have removed from the barter economy and now have external pressures economically to have jobs and an income and sustain themselves and all these things. And so what happens there is that you get a lot of pressure from foreign timber companies, foreign mining companies, all these outside, let's call them extractive industries that, will walk into a community, give a box of T-shirts and expect, mining rights. And, so they...
That's brutal.
Yeah, this village really, wanted to do something different, and they made the hard choice to hey, we don't want to be like our neighbors or our peers or villagers down the river. We really want to do things a little bit different, and made this very hard decision that they are going to be the people who are known for trying to conserve their resources. They just needed a way to make it financially work. And so, Costa was like, look, let's figure out if we can help them. And so they put together a small team, which I was honored to be part of, to kind of go figure this out. And, fast forward, we'd figured out a model that we thought could be successful and, probably scalable around the world. And the society or the world at large didn't really need another nonprofit, but nobody was doing what we were doing. So we just a couple of us just said, let's set up an organization and let's try to scale this around the world.
Yeah.
So basically, you guys went and found that even some of the most remote, once idyllic indigenous communities have been affected by colonization in a way that it's wow, they really have been touched by miners coming in and forestry companies coming in, and it's they want themselves, these communities want to tap into the tourism that could exist in that place, but they just don't have the means. So Indifly was we can kind of help that part of it. You guys know the place. We have the kind of business money. We can kind of combine, and that's
Let's stick with that project for a minute, and I'll just talk about some of the challenges to that, right? And look, the whole loincloth spears versus Ed Hardy T-shirts was definitely my own naivete. When we first started going there, all they had was a shortwave radio, right?
Right.
That reached the next village, eventually got to Georgetown, the capital. So communication was an issue. They really had no way to invite people into their village to experience what they had there. there was a financial or a banking issue, right? Their bank, quote unquote, at the time was a 2-day river trip away, and they could, I forget the exact number, but they could only accept like $5,000 a month. You want to go on that trip today, it's $7,600 per rod. And so, it's just a capacity issue there that had to be worked out. And so now you fast forward through reinvestment, largely by their own part, and I want to be clear here that all the credit goes to the village. Is the lodge chairman walks around with a smartphone. He can't call anybody, but they have installed satellite internet, and he can answer client emails. They have the banking thing worked out to where now people in the know are comfortable sending that amount of money to the middle of the rainforest, if you will. And it's just as the years gone by, they've made these constant improvements as really, really strong businessmen and women, and they're able to also communicate with outside world. And so part of what we did in the beginning, sorry to cut you off, was simply like told the story and said, look, this is a community in need, and fly anglers are people who step up, and they went down and explored. It's also a really cool experience. I bet. And they were obviously vital to the whole thing, but the villagers made the tough call in the beginning.
Wild. I mean, ecotourism is like we talk about it a lot actually with people, because it's like sort of something that's, I think people are becoming, everywhere are becoming more kind of aware of the benefits of it. Like, maybe we don't cut the whole forest down and that's how we make our money. Maybe we put a lodge and people can go hiking in the beautiful trees. And it's like that turns out to be, lucrative.
People want to go and explore these places. You see it all over the place, right? If you can find like a socially responsible way of doing it, people will definitely flock to it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially if the communities want it to.
So it doesn't feel like as exploitive as so many other things where you're like, go in and take some pictures for Instagram.
We're stealing, we're building a mine here.
Exactly.
Like, what are you going to do about it? Yeah.
I mean, so I had a bit of a question. You mentioned with the arapaima and people kind of being aware of the environment and stuff. And so I'm curious how much of with conservation and this is the fishing is a resource for a lot of these places. I'm kind of curious how catch and release fishing is received in these places where it's like, you're doing it for your sport, and it's interesting. It's like, this is a conversation we have all the time with people. Like, why do you fish if you're just putting the fish back? But also it's like how it seems like people are quite aware of conservation and the impact that's, the climate change and the environment's changing. So how much do you see this through the communities you're going through? Like, how aware is everyone of what's going on? How aware is everyone of we need to be doing something? And kind of, I guess it's like the more people can see what's happening, do you find people that's a factor in wanting to facilitate this sort of thing?
Great question. Let me answer your question by giving you an example or a story. So, one of the things that you try to do when you, want to have a huge impact or a bigger impact with people that are in a community, fly community in this case, is, geographic diversity, species diversity. Those two things are pretty important. So as we looked kind of at a map and did due diligence on, okay, what is the next project outside of that one that's very jungle driven, right? We were very intrigued by French Polynesia. 118 islands and atolls. In theory, you make it work one place, you can make it work multiple islands and atolls within that country. Fast forward, after looking at a different island, we ended up on this island called Anna. And what happened there was, largely a bonefish fishery. It has, it's a little bit unique in that it has one place with enough tidal inflow for bonefish to go out of the lagoon and spawn. And, that was somewhat of a concern. But again, the first thing that we do is we start everything with science. So we sent a scientist there who actually ended up staying for 3 years. And we partnered with another local nonprofit. and you know,
It's a sweet
together.
job.
What's that?
It's a pretty sweet job.
Yeah,
3 years.
It's interesting. You know, he would also be a great interview. It's a guy named Alex. He's from the University of Hawaii. We helped him finish his PhD, but he, you know, was he's honestly like the nicest guy in the world. And you know, I saw him, you know, maybe year 2 that he was in. Or after he'd been on French Polynesia, he was like a completely different person.
Yeah.
You know, he's got long hair. He speaks a different language now. He's part of the community, which is a really cool story there. I'll tell you in a minute. But, you know, he came in kind of as the the world's nicest guy, and he had to, you know, assimilate into this culture, which is known for being warriors. You know, they had a cannibal army up until like the 1950s or 60s. You know, it's just a place that can be hard to become one of them, in, so to speak. Anyway, so what he found, and I am getting around to an answer to your question, is basically that bonefish fishery was in collapse. And so what they did was, you know, spawning aggregations, they all kind of go in one place, swim in a circle, go out to the open ocean. So over the years, you know, they had devised these series of public and private traps. And so they're little stone mazes, and basically to exemplify it, fish goes left, makes it out to the open ocean, spawns, and comes back, hopefully. Fish goes right, ends up in chicken wire and gets eaten, or what we found out was shipped off the island. So, you know, the reason why we thought it was a concern in the beginning is because this is a very vivid memory for me. Sitting around, first trip, in somebody's driveway, conversation starter, what's your favorite fish to eat? You know, clearly that's your diet. Everyone, without hesitation, says bonefish, you know, which is not something you hear very often.
No.
And we're like, oh, man, like, we should probably figure this out fairly quickly. And so what the science team looks at is something called spawning potential ratio. So healthy fishery is around 20%. You know, we figured out, the science team figured out this fishery was at 9. You know, so the fishery was in collapse. And this is my answer to your question. It was very much a generational divide. So the older generation said, there's been bonefish here my entire life. There will always be bonefish. The younger generation, who at that point we had worked with the school, and you know, they created this little marine educational area. They would go out every day in the lagoon and see what was there. We bought them a drone. They would go up and you know, fly it and count spawning aggregations, and you know, bring it back. And we got them a software program to where they could count fish, and so they were very much invested. And the kids were very much of the mindset, like, we need to do something about this now. And another cool antidote to this story is every kid on that island leaves for a different island school at age 11. So these are all kids aged 10 and under. And so what they did was they went around, if you fast forward, to the community and got what's called a rahui passed. And a rahui is this ancient Polynesian custom that is, you know, they call it a political move. Really, it's a moratorium on harvest. And so, you know, like back in the day, you broke a rahui, they'd cut off your arm or you know, kill you or something like that. Now it's a little less strict, but it requires a referendum. So they took a bus from door to door all throughout the community and said, look, Grandpa, Grandma, Uncle, Dad, whoever, I want you to start making decisions with me in mind and just not for yourself. And these kids, 10 and under, got a rahui pass for like the first time in hundreds of years on Anna.
That's incredible.
And it became this really cool conservation story that nobody saw coming. All through youth leadership on the atoll. And, you know, it kind of culminated, back to Alex, it culminated in this big ceremony. So for how that works is for 5 years during the 3 months of the spawn, nobody can capture or kill a bonefish. And so basically what they were doing before was just chopping them off at the legs, right? And so they allow them to go out and spawn and come back. And, now that SPR, that spawning potential ratio, is over 20%. We'd like to see it get to closer to 40 because we think what's going to happen eventually is that they're going to go back to fishing the way that they were.
That's great progress.
Which is completely understandable. But, back to the Alex story. So, big Rahui ceremony. We all go down for it. What I found funny is that they sacrificed 2 adult bonefish. So, they bury bonefish. And it's very much this cultural event. And they asked everybody to bring a rock from wherever you were from. And you put the rock on the mantle where they sacrificed the bonefish. And everybody kind of places that rock around. And, says, I'm Matt, I'm from X. And they got to Alex, and Alex said, my name's Alex, and he went to say, I'm from Hawaii, and everybody just screamed, "Nah!" Like at that point, he was one of them.
That's awesome.
And it was
so
just
cool.
this really cool, powerful thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's a very, very long answer to your question, but I hope I got there.
So you're saying we need young kids to petition for change.
Man, yes.
Save the fisheries. I have a 7-year-old. I'll get her out there with the clipboard.
Oh,
the next
Ophelia
gen
will do it
that's
too.
really going to fix it.
But it's also showing them the proof of what's happening, visualizing it so that they understand. Yeah, it's a big part of it.
I mean, you definitely hear it, when you talk to, when you run into older people on the river and stuff, in here in Ontario, you hear that a lot. People are like, "Oh, there's still trout in there." And you're like, "I used to catch 15 trout a day," and you're like, "Yeah, where are they now? They're all gone."
Yeah. Thanks.
Funny how that works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting. Wow, this is just the craziest. Just such a different thing. How do you guys find the communities that you want to work with? Do you just show up to places and you're like,
"What's up?"
Interested? Because that's obviously would be a weird thing.
Yeah, that's another great question. The answer is no, we don't do that. But what we do is, we have a group of people who are very heavily traveled, and they'll tend to go to a place and say, "Hey, these people need help. I think, the model could work here." That list is actually becoming very long. Look, as a nonprofit, we have limited resources, people, money, time, all of those things. And so we're really good about doing due diligence. Again, these are 100% community-owned and operated entities. So the first thing to do is to kind of have a conversation with the community and gauge interest. Because if they aren't interested, the model doesn't work. Right. And so, that's kind of the first step. Luckily, we have a pretty good success rate there. But, even if you look in the United States, so we have 2 domestic programs, and, the need is, just as great here in the United States as it is anywhere. And, so it's challenging. There's lots of places in the world that could do this. There's also, the other avenue of that is there's lots of really good operators who aren't Indigenous themselves but have a benefit to an Indigenous community, so we do social impact projects with them. So over COVID we did a solar installation in a village in Lesotho, which is and the company's called African Waters. It's a group of South Africans who work with a village that's a yellowfish fishery, and the story there is that they had never had what we would now consider kind of a basic human need of electricity, and what they really wanted was light. And it was one of these things where the government had promised it for the last decade, and it just hadn't happened. And, for us, we, can make a pretty major change in people's day-to-day lives for nominal investment. And so we were able to install 59 little kits, which came with a solar panel, an inverter, and a light and a charging station. And for the first time, it was everybody in the village had light, and it was this really cool, powerful thing to see. But I think one of the coolest quotes that I heard that came out from that was, no matter where you're at in that structure of the village, whether you're in leadership or whether you're a laborer or whether you're unemployed, everybody's kind of on equal footing now. Everybody has light in their house. And,
right.
It was super cool. But, I'll say about, African Waters, those guys are amazing. And, for us, if you say I'm having a positive impact on a community, we want you to prove it, right? How many people are you employing? What are you doing for conservation? Right. How much money actually goes back to the village? All of those things. And so they really stepped up and were able to prove all that. And it's been a great partnership.
Have you done anything in Belize at all? Because I know Belize, some places, some communities struggle with overfishing, and this is their one way, these communities to make a living is to fish with the seines. The seines is a problem because it's, and I know a lot of people are trying to work with them to figure out a way they can devise some sort of a new seine that won't affect other wildlife and only focus on the one that they're actually fishing for. I don't know if you've touched on that. Or if you've... Yeah,
that's the bycatch issue. We haven't done any work in Belize. It's certainly on the list, but no, we aren't active there yet.
Yeah,
it's cool. Just the idea of experiencing these places with people that are from there, and indigenous people from that area. If you're going to go somewhere, then see it. Who better to share it with you than the people that own that land. It's it reminds me of even Northern Ontario and places like that, when we fished up, the furthest we fished north was the Attawapiskat River. And remember we fished with
Norm,
who's from Fort Albany, and just spending, a week with him, seeing, his river was I think that was what really made it so special, because it was I don't know, there's just something with that experience. Have the communities themselves really embraced this, and how are they responding to sort of the projects that are going on and having people come and taking them out?
Yeah, it's cyclical, I would say, or it goes in phases, right? I mentioned earlier in the beginning, I think you're a bit crazy, rightfully so. But once you earn the trust, that's something that we're huge on. Let's take Wind River, which is our first domestic project. 2.2 million acres, Wyoming. It's one of the few reservations in the United States that actually has two tribes on it. So one tribe's ancestral land, federal government. Their original treaty was 44 million acres, which, if you can visualize that, is multiple states in the West wide.
Huge.
And within 5 years, it got shrunk down to 2.2 million acres. Then the government put their arch enemies kind of on the same piece of land. And so there's just this long history of skepticism that's been built up. And, part of what we really try to do is to take the time to earn trust. And so, if you're talking about trying to create generational change amongst, people, resources, all of those things, we feel pretty strongly that you have to be willing to take the time on the front end to do it right and earn the trust. Yeah. And so, once you can get through that and, build those relationships, I would say, I have, really strong friendships, that even go outside of, what we're trying to do there in these places. And so, my point is, it goes through these phases, and then, you start inviting people down. And typically what we'll do, and kind of how the model progresses, is, we'll start doing angler research trips. So you go down with the expectation that you're going to not catch a fish, let it go, and go catch another fish. You're going to catch a fish. The scientist is going to do his or her thing, and you're going to learn about that process, and then however long that takes, you're going to be patient with understanding that it's benefiting the resource, and then you're going to go catch another fish.
Right.
And so we'll start trickling people in that are adding to the economic input of the community while benefiting the resource, and then we'll fully open it up. And one of the challenges with doing all this is the ownership side's pretty easy. That's legal, that's whatever it needs to be. That right. part is typically pretty easy. The operations part is a little bit harder. So the workforce development piece of it, and everyone from cooks to housekeepers to drivers to guides, which is very technical, as you guys know. That takes time to develop all that. And so, once that comes into play, it's a different phase, and then you kind of open the floodgates, if you will. And typically, knock on wood, hopefully this continues, we've had a really strong interest in new destinations. So,
wow.
So
it's a long, yeah.
I was just wondering, just because I know everybody's got questions, but what?
I'll shut up and you guys can ask questions.
No,
there's so much to talk about.
I'm very curious. Based on how passionate you are, I feel like there's got to be a project that you've just been dying to sink your teeth into, and I just want to know what that is. If there is something that's on your mind that you've just been like, this place I really want to get in there.
Yeah, there's multiple.
Yeah.
When I think Westerners talk about Indigenous, they go to Africa. And I think there are lots of places in Africa that this could work. There's also lots of geopolitical concerns in Africa, including safety and cost. Quite frankly, we looked at one project, which I probably shouldn't name, but it was just going to be cost prohibitive. You're like $25,000 all in, right? And you got to be able to disappear off the grid for like 2 weeks, and so the business model has to work as well. So definitely lots of places in Africa, but I'm not going to answer your question, but I'll tell you what really excites me is that our whole model is one in which eventually a community gets to a point where they're 100% operating this, 100% owning this, all on their own. They're interacting with clients. They are doing all the logistics. They're doing all their own marketing. It's 100%
sustainable.
It's always 100% their business, but they're doing it all. And then we are able to deploy those resources that were in effect there elsewhere. But what really excites me, and this is starting to happen in a couple places, is then people from those communities go and teach their peers in another community. And, then it becomes this, like, we move a lot quicker, and,
that's what you want.
When a bunch of white dudes or a bunch of non-natives show up, and it just, the ball moves faster when it's peer-to-peer almost.
Absolutely.
And that's what's really exciting to me.
Do you find like people are seeking your company out after like hearing positive things about how it's been implemented?
Yeah, the answer is yes. And this is back to probably my self-promotion thing. We've flown under the radar for a long time, almost purposely. Like, we're not the nonprofit organization that wants to raise money to raise money. We want to raise money to the need. We really felt strongly that we needed to prove the model out first, and then, ask people to help us grow. And so we're doing a better job of that now. But on the destination side, which I think is what you're asking about, the answer is yes. Typically, like, if you're in the fly fishing industry, I hope that you've heard about Indifly. I hope that you've heard about the impact. But more importantly, I hope you've heard about these cool experiences that you can go on and do what you love to do, and with the added benefit of having this tremendous impact on the community. And, I hope that answer is yes, and I believe it is.
Well, I imagine as well, like, as a fly angler that's interested in traveling to a remote place, it would have some merit knowing that, like, hey, this operation was started by Indifly. That, there's some, like, like you said, like sending tens of thousands of dollars into the middle of the jungle, right? If you're like, oh, okay, well, this was an Indifly project. This was, it gives some like some clout, I guess.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that sets us apart, and this certainly isn't the right way to do it from an organizational sustainability part, but we felt very strongly from the very beginning that the only way that this works is if they are 100% community owned. Like the easy way to do a nonprofit like this would be to say, okay, I'm going to do a microfinance thing where we're going to give you X dollars in terms of a capital infusion, and you can build a lodge, and you can train people, and you can do all those things, and you're going to pay us 0.5% or 1% back, or the other way would be we're going to take a 10% stake in the business, and that's how we're going to fund the next project. We feel very strongly that it doesn't work like that. The one being just it's not the right thing to do, but two, if you want to have an impact in the community, and again, this is I'm going to use the term empower here, empowering the these vital stewards of 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity to have the biggest impact on their homelands that they can. 100% of those funds need to stay in that village,
absolutely,
or community. So I will say though, man, one of the things that we try to do when we look at new projects is how do we appeal to the most amount of anglers, right? The domestic thing's a little bit easier, but all of our international programs, they're longer trips, 7 to 10 days, and they are largely spent off the grid. So you got to be able to disconnect, and they're not cheap. For a reason, right? We want to attract the right type of angler, and so it's and have the biggest amount of impact. And so we try more and more to look for places that are a little bit more easily accessible, that can have the same impact, maybe at a different price point.
Do you find this might be a kind of weird question. Are you aware of any like copycat type situations where people see like, hey, there's a potential to make some money here?
I hope so.
Exactly.
That's a good thing.
That's kind of like
but like in a negative way, they're like trying to exploit these places.
Exactly.
Yeah. Not in the sense that you're thinking of, thankfully yet. But I'll give you a funny Guyana story. So. Trip is marketed as you're, hundreds of miles in the middle of the rainforest. You're not going to see another person the whole time you're there. You're spending hours and hours in a boat. There's lots of funny stories about people almost getting lost. I'll deviate here for a minute. One of the first trips down, we're just exploring, right? And we've been, it's the dry season, so all you see on the river is a 30-foot cliff. So you have no reference of where you are. You're just on the water somewhere. And, we've been out for 4 hours or so, fishing with a guy named Austin. And, Austin's a funny guy who cracks a lot of jokes. And we, get hooked up on a fish. The fish immediately swims to the bank. Clearly, there's roots coming out of the bank. Clearly going to get broken off. Austin makes a comment like, somebody's going to have to jump in and untangle this thing. And, before we can make it, laugh it off, this guy is jumping in the water, and all we see are like 6 black caimans sink.
Oh my God.
And we're like, you need to get back in the boat. Anyway, where I'm going with the story is marketed as a place where you're not going to see anyone. We're leaving the lodge one day. We go downriver about 30 minutes, and we pass another boat with clearly not locals in it.
Right.
And they're like waving us down. And we pull up to them, and we're like, what are you doing here? And they're like, well, we found this trip online. It was like half the cost or a third of the cost of the Rewa operation, and so we just thought we'd book that. But they hadn't had like food or water in 2 days, and they hadn't caught any fish, and so the answer is yes. Like within communities, there tends to be some type of animosity or even sometimes jealousy of what this community is doing in terms of, employing their own people and doing good for the resource. And so they try to replicate it, but they don't understand the logistics or the business end of what it takes to provide people with good and, in this case, safe experience. And so we've ran into that, but we haven't ran into there are lots of organizations doing great things in the outdoors, just not as specific as what we do. Probably because it's a little challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but the impact that it can have, it's just like crazy how many things it affects. Yeah. Environmental, it's socioeconomic. It's just so many things. It's great. Super cool.
No, thanks.
What made you want to do this type of work?
Great question. So back to when we kind of started the organization, it was me and a couple other guys, and we, kind of came from varying backgrounds. Somebody had to run the thing. I committed to doing it for a couple of years. That's, 10 years ago.
Right.
And I'm still here. But, I'm super passionate about, service, impacting people and the environment. And, this is something that that passion has only grown as the organization has grown. And, it's just one of those things that, it kind of, at this point it's a passion project. And, I have a very understanding wife.
Yeah, it's a really cool job, so, I totally get it, but an interesting one,
Yeah,
it takes a lot of, something to keep going if it's, like you say, it's a passion project,
Yeah, and look, I think that fly fishing is this really cool, in my opinion, underutilized tool for good. It's one of these very few hobbies or passions that attracts this really committed do-good group that can have a tremendous impact while doing what you love to do in these places that are really cool around the world. We have a guy, Bryant, who's from the Menominee Reservation, who's on our team. He runs our North American programs, and when he first got in, one of I met him through Kristen Mustad, who owns Nautilus Reels, and Bryant told me this story. Is he reached out to Kristen for some help at some point, and he's like, Kristen told him, he's like, look, you're going to find little to very few assholes in this industry. And I think that is true. It's a group of passionate people who want to do really good things and have an impact. And so, fly fishing to me is like the perfect tool to have that impact.
It's funny you say that. Yeah, I'm thinking about it now. I don't think I've met really any assholes in this industry. Everybody does tend to be a pretty good person. They're
just
they're
you,
nice
man.
And, that's cool. Fly fishing it's funny. When we talk about it as this sort of niche thing, and then it's no, but it can help indigenous communities. It's so crazy.
It's interesting. I think you see this in any super niche sports. I saw it in rock climbing a lot, and then in fly fishing, it's the same sort of thing. There's people realize it's kind of a ridiculous hobby, and people are doing it or having a great time doing it. And if you're not having a great time, then stop doing it.
Yeah.
And funny enough, you're not going to love it unless you try it. You're not going to understand unless you do it. And that's the hard. That's the hard part. Is getting I'm trying to get Andy, one of our close friends, Matt. He takes photos for us from time to time, and the hardest thing. We have a break. I'm like, Andy, take up a rod. Let me teach you how to cast. He's not going to do it.
He doesn't want to. Why he doesn't want to fish? It's weird.
It's so
at
weird.
This point, It's weird.
I know. It's you're here.
Just fish. He's nah.
But as soon as he touches the rod, as soon as he casts, as soon as he catches something, he's going to fall in love with it. And then, the rest is history.
Do you find that Andy just may be intimidated? Because I certainly went through that. When I first started fishing, I was this looks super challenging,
Yeah.
and I'm just going to make myself look like an asshole.
There's too much to learn.
Andy likes to like lay down on a rock and like soak up the sun.
Yeah.
That's what
his
Andy
passion.
does.
Yeah, that's his
his
passion.
passion.
Lounging.
He appreciates the waterways.
But maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know he'll get into it one day. He said.
He messaged.
I think it can be intimidating.
He actually
You're
messaged me the other day.
Absolutely.
He's fallen in love. Maybe we should bleep
Oh,
that
wow,
out.
there you go.
And his
Shout out to
his
Andy.
partner.
Andy.
Actually, she wants to learn how to fly fish because she's a fisher.
All
She's
right.
she's an angler, and so
We'll take
now
that one now.
Andy wants to be taught how. This
Shout out
happened
to
today.
Andy, man.
Anyway, sorry, Matt. I digress. I just wanted to let you know.
No. I love that story because now it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
gonna
for
happen,
sure.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, Matt, we do 5 questions at the end of every show where we ask the same 5 questions to every guest. They're called Mitchie's Fishes 5. So we're going to ask you them now. And then that'll be that. It's not like a buzzer beat. It's just 5 more questions. You can take as much time as you want to answer them.
Way to put
Okay,
me
so
on the
first-
spot.
I know it is. There's some good putting you on the spot questions in this batch. Okay, so the first one is: you had to pick a favorite fish. What would it be and why? What would be your favorite fish?
Oh man, see that I'm sure that people give you multiple answers to this all the time because it's you can't pick one. But I'm
Yeah.
going to try my best. I'm going to say Napoleon wrasse. I think that they are just this
Wow.
cool, iconic
Never heard that.
species. Everyone kind of looks different. If you look like really closely at like around their gills, they have these really intricate designs.
They're
it's
crazy.
just a cool fish.
I saw one on Indifly today.
Yeah,
Posted
right.
on
I mean,
Indifly,
that's
yeah.
probably why it's in my head because there's actually a picture of it around here somewhere. But man. But like, I'm also going to say,
course.
the 20+ inch brown trout and
Yeah.
the giant trevally and all of it.
Man, that was a great answer. We have 100%
Never
that
heard.
fish as their favorite
Yeah.
fish on the show.
I love it.
Okay, well,
So there you go.
It's
Napoleon wrasse.
I think it's not really a targeted species all that often. They do have them in Anna at our project. So do we have time for another story about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I'm going to leave this person unnamed so I don't embarrass him. But
Okay.
so there is one boat that a guy has. His name's Tapanu, that can go outside the reef in Anna. And so we're down there on this trip, and he has a grandson who is by far the best angler, not fly angler, but angler on the island. And he goes this kid who's 10 now will spend 8 hours a day on the boat with his grandpa and not complain once. Anyway, we're out there and we're fishing into the reef, which we haven't done a lot, but that's generally where you can find Napoleon. So we're fishing for like 2 hours, and this kid in French says, Grandpa, these guys don't understand fishing. And the mate on the boat heard it, and he attaches a little crab to a hand line and sticks it down in the water for 30 seconds and pulls the deepest blue, biggest Napoleon I've ever seen out of the reef.
Whoa.
And everybody's laughing because Toa Nui is the kid's name. Toa Nui's proclamation was correct, but then the mate just kills it right there on the boat. And this guy who will remain nameless, like his whole body just turned white.
Right.
And he's like, "What did I just do?" And anyway,
Those things get huge.
I mean,
good Napoleon story.
they're beautiful fish. Like, they're so cool.
So you're gonna have to edit that out so we can get to the 5 faster.
No.
That's totally cool. We can go all night, man. I mean, jeez. Okay. The second question is, if you could fish anywhere in the world right now, assuming it's like the best time to go and you're going to have a great time, where would you go and why?
Yeah. As I'm been freezing for now, 9 months? I'm definitely going to say somewhere warm. I've always been really interested in, like the Congo. You know, I think that would be super cool.
Whoa.
It probably would have, you know, I now have a family, and it's probably never going to happen. But I think that would be super cool. You know, yeah, I'll stick with that one answer.
That's a good answer. The Congo looks incredible. I mean, like, it looks like one of the most amazing places you could go. So, I mean, fly fishing there would be wild.
I'm also not anywhere good enough of a fly angler to do that. So,
well, hey, you know, I mean, part of the trip is just going someplace and exploring, and you know, that's what's cool about fly fishing. It's like so much more. We say it all the time. So much more.
Congo would be a trip, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I can dig that. That's definitely the first time I've heard that too.
Man, I'm on a roll.
Yeah.
You're on a roll. You're on a roll.
Or I'm just an idiot and should be giving different answers.
Oh, these are great. These are super.
Definitely not.
Okay, number 3 is what is one of your best or favorite fishing memories of all time? One of the best that stand out to you.
Yeah. So I've developed this really close relationship with a guy who is super inspiring. He's the director of fishing game on the Wind River Indian Reservation. And I've never met someone with a more challenging job that has just this continuing drive to do, you know, good for his homeland. And I would say the first time that we went out fishing together, and you know, he's been an angler his whole life, but you know, not a fly angler. And the first time he landed a fish on the fly, like I think his face will be ingrained in me for a while. He now also blames me for his wife's expensive fly fishing habits. So.
That's awesome. Yeah, that first fish, you know, like that's always like.
Yeah, for me, man,
one of the best.
That's kind of what it's always been. You know, oftentimes when we go, like, I'll just sit in the boat, man. I get as much enjoyment now out of watching other people catch fish than me casting a rod all day long. So.
I totally agree. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, I mean, you, like, form such a special relationship with the water and fish, and then showing someone get excited about it, it's, like, really exciting. It's like, wow, this person thinks this is cool? Okay, I'm not alone. Yeah. I'm not, like, some weird loser. Like, that's super cool. Yeah, I can dig that. Okay, number 4, Mitch's Fishies 5, is why do you fly fish? Why do you fly fish at all?
Oh, man, I'm going to get really deep here. I do think that there is some type of chemical something that happens when you're outside standing in a river, walking a flat. You know, it's I guess I would do it for that, coupled with the fact that you know, now I've seen it. There's a demonstrable thing in my head to where I know how much good that this sport can do, and so I guess I look at it with a different perspective, but. And like, you know, I'm would consider myself just above a novice. So, you know, the whole idea of, you know, I'm not going to learn this thing in its entirety or master it before I die is very appealing to me.
Yeah, true. Yeah, just like kind of like how it can humble you, you know, like how amazing it is in that sense. But yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, like we've never heard. I don't think that's another first. I think, like, why do you fly fish? Like, you see the positive impacts it can have on communities. Like, that's true. That's cool. That's really cool. Yeah.
All right, am I 4 for 4 now?
You're 4 for 4. Let's see what this is.
This is the curveball.
Yeah, it is.
It is. Okay, so this last question is, what fly pattern represents you best and why? If you were a fly, what would you be?
Oh, man.
We've got tons
time,
of woolly
boogers.
Like
yeah, well, I mean, that's like, I feel like that's the
one.
easy answer, right?
It's the humble answer.
You know, I'm not going to say the pink worm.
Yeah, we've had some of those.
I'm sure.
That's awesome.
Man, I think it would be. It doesn't even have a name, but there's a fly that resembles a peacock bass that we use to target arapaima, and you know, we I'm going to get deep again. We started giant fish means giant hook and giant pattern, right? But the way that these fish eat is they're like vacuum feeders. So they go up behind the fish and they just hold it behind the fly and they suck it in and they just hold it in their mouth. And if you ever watch somebody try to set a hook in an arapaima, it's very amusing because when you think that you have it set, I mean, you're just constantly setting and setting. And when you think you have it set, they jump and they just spit the hook and, like downplay. So fast forward is what really happened is that it's, like an 8-aught hook with, and very little pattern, right? But colorful because the water is dense. And so I think, somewhat of an enigma is that fly, and I've been told that I'm somewhat of an enigma multiple times, and so I think that would probably track a little bit.
I like that. So it's like a little peacock bass, basically. Yeah, it's an imitation.
Yeah,
5 for 5. I need to see a picture of this fly.
I got to try to find. Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
maybe we can. Maybe we'll ask you for a picture of it or something.
Yeah, I can send one to you.
Yeah, that'd be cool. That's a great answer. Yeah, that is 5 for 5. We have definitely never.
Is it a fly that one of the communities you visited made on it's an original?
So they do now. I think the first guy to figure that out was Oliver White.
Oliver White. Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Man. Good answers. Yeah. Hey, there you go. Those are all original Mitchie's Fishies
Very
5.
good.
So
Very good.
Wow.
How about that?
I don't know how great they were, but they're different.
They were great, man. They were great, and it was great getting to chat. And like Matt, thank you so much for coming on the show and just kind of taking us through Indifly and what y'all are doing. I think it's super cool. How can people get involved with Indifly?
Shameless plug time.
Where can they find you?
Yeah,
how can they help?
Time.
Yeah.
I think there's a few ways. One, awareness is always a big thing for us. So, check out what we do. There's quite a few videos and other content related items out there. If you like what we do, tell your friends about what we do. The other thing is, if you want to go on a trip, reach out. You can have the benefit of having a really unique experience while also impacting the community. And then the third way I would say is, we're a nonprofit, right? Here's my really shameless plug. We rely on the generosity of other people to have that impact. And so we're getting ready to relaunch a program which is in existence now, but we're just making it a lot cooler, which is the Indifly Core, which is this monthly sustainer program that has some really cool benefits to it. So, look out for that in the coming weeks as well.
Wicked. Amazing. Okay, we'll put links to stuff in the show notes as well. And Matt, thank you again so much for coming on. It was awesome.
Thanks for the opportunity, guys. I always feel like we just scratched the surface, but
totally.
Really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, ditto. Maybe we'll have to do another chat sometime and get into some other stuff. But thanks
great
again.
meeting you, Matt.
Thank you, guys.